Most arrived in ragged uniforms, sweat and dirt caked into the fabric after months of battle and surrender. The long marches, the endless dust of island roads, and the unrelenting tropical heat had left their bodies exhausted, but nothing prepared them for the strangeness that awaited inside. After registration, medical checks, and distribution of basic supplies, they were herded into a large wooden building with pipes running overhead. The sight stopped many of them in their tracks. The structure did not look like anything they had seen in the Pacific. Wide rows of nozzles protruded from metal lines, each with a drain beneath. The American guards, brisk and efficient, motioned for them to strip and line up. For the first time, many realized they were not simply being held, they were expected to wash. Among the prisoners, confusion spread like a ripple. Bathing for Japanese soldiers during the war was rare, often improvised in rivers or seas, and always constrained by supply shortages. Soap was considered a luxury, yet here, in the custody of their sworn enemy, they were being directed toward an organized ritual of cleansing. Some clutched their belongings as if expecting a trick. Others whispered nervously about the steam rising from the pipes. They remembered tales spread by their officers before surrender, that the Americans were brutal, that capture meant humiliation, that prisoners would be treated worse than animals. Now, staring at gleaming metal showers, they wondered if this was some hidden cruelty. The guards, impatient with hesitation, barked orders in English and gestured again. Shoes, belts, tunics, all had to be removed. One by one, reluctant hands, unfastened buttons, and bodies scarred by jungle campaigns stood exposed. The prisoners felt vulnerable, humiliated in front of strangers and each other. Still, they obeyed, clutching the bars of soap thrust into their palms. Then came the hiss of water. From the overhead pipes gushed streams of clean liquid, hot to the touch. The sudden warmth shocked the men. For an instant they froze, expecting pain. Instead, as the water coursed down their backs and shoulders, washing away layers of grime, a strange calm overtook them. Some closed their eyes, letting the dirt swirl into the drains. Others rubbed cautiously with the rough soap, as if testing whether it was truly allowed. Slowly, the initial fear melted into quiet awe. They had not felt such heat and freshness in months, even years. In the islands where they had fought, water had been rationed, showers non-existent, lice and disease rampant. To step under a stream of hot water with no buckets, no shouting officers, no restrictions, was an almost unthinkable luxury. Here, in enemy hands, they were cleaner than they had ever been in their own army barracks. When they emerged, towels awaited them, thick cotton towels, folded in stacks. Many prisoners touched them as though they were artifacts from another world. They dried their bodies awkwardly, not used to such fabric. For the Americans, this was routine camp procedure. For the Japanese, it was a revelation. They shuffled out, hair dripping, skin pink from the warmth, and an unmistakable murmur of astonishment passed among them. The fear that had gripped them when first entering the shower hall was replaced by bewilderment. Had their captors truly given them comfort instead of cruelty? That first encounter with the camp showers lingered in their minds long after. It was the beginning of a series of discoveries that challenged everything they had been taught about the enemy. The experience was not just about washing dirt away, it was about confronting the difference between what they had been told and what they now lived. The modern shower, with its endless hot water and soap, became a symbol of something larger, the realization that captivity might not mean degradation, but an unexpected glimpse into another civilization's way of life. When the first showers ended and the prisoners filed back into the barracks, a heavy silence spread across the room. They sat on wooden benches, some clutching their folded uniforms, others rubbing their hair with the thick towels, still unsure whether they had experienced a blessing or a hidden threat. Many avoided eye contact, as though speaking openly might break some unspoken rule. Deep inside, however, unease gnawed at them. They had been warned countless times that capture by Americans meant dishonor, torture, and death. In whispered briefings before battles, Japanese officers had painted images of sadistic enemy camps where starvation and abuse awaited. Yet here, the first act forced upon them was bathing with soap and hot water. To many, it seemed suspicious, too kind, too civilized. One prisoner, a former naval mechanic from Yokosuka, recalled how Allied propaganda leaflets had depicted smiling prisoners of war receiving food and rest. He had always dismissed those papers as lies, designed to weaken Japanese morale. Now, standing clean for the first time in months, he remembered those illustrations with a chill. Could it be that some of them were true? But another thought crept into his mind, darker and more terrifying. What if the showers were not meant for cleanliness at all? Rumors circulated quickly, especially among those with sharper memories of wartime propaganda. Some whispered the words gas chambers, drawing comparisons to vague stories about the Germans in Europe. Although few knew details, the idea that Americans might use showers for some hidden cruelty spread fast in hushed tones. The guards noticed the hesitation. They watched groups of prisoners pause at the doorways, their faces clouded with mistrust. Orders were repeated, and translators explained in broken Japanese that bathing was simply mandatory hygiene. But suspicion did not vanish easily. For men trained to believe surrender was a fate worse than death, any act of comfort carried the taste of deception. They wondered if the soap they were given was poisoned, if the warmth of the water concealed something sinister. Some even refused to wash thoroughly, merely wetting their arms and backs before stepping away. The cultural clash made the moment more jarring. In Japan, bathing had deep cultural roots, tied to ritual purification in hot springs and shared communal baths. But war had stripped away that tradition, leaving soldiers unwashed for weeks, crawling with lice, fighting constant infections. The camp showers, in contrast, were industrial in design, rows of steel pipes and drains, efficient, without privacy, operated like clockwork. To the Americans, this was practical hygiene, nothing more. To the Japanese, it felt alien, mechanical, almost dehumanizing. It was a ritual stripped of its spiritual meaning, transformed into something functional, yet unsettling. For days, conversations among the prisoners circled around the same questions. Why would the Americans waste hot water on captives? Why give soap, towels, and time when they could have simply left them filthy? Was it truly generosity, or was it part of some larger plan to break them mentally? Theories multiplied in the dimly lit barracks. Some argued that the showers were a form of control, a way to weaken resistance by softening men with comfort. Others whispered that hidden chemicals might be mixed into the water. Fear clung to them, reinforced by memories of warnings from their superiors. Yet no punishment followed. No hidden cruelty emerged. The men returned to the barracks at night, still breathing, still alive, cleaner than before. Slowly, suspicion began to erode, replaced by a quieter, reluctant curiosity. The Americans repeated the process the next day and the day after that. Soap continued to be distributed, guards made sure every man entered the shower hall, and still nothing terrible happened. Suspicion remained, but now it mingled with another feeling, confusion. What kind of enemy would care if their prisoners smelled clean or carried fewer lice? For men raised to believe capture was a fate worse than death, the realization was as unsettling as the showers themselves. The daily rhythm of hygiene soon became part of camp life, though at first it felt forced upon the Japanese prisoners. Each morning or evening, depending on the schedule, guards lined them up and marched them to the shower hall. At the entrance, they received soap, wrapped in paper, smelling strongly of chemicals, unlike anything from home, and towels, often marked with military supply stamps. The routine was mechanical: strip, step under the streams, wash thoroughly, dry, dress, and return. But as days turned into weeks, The prisoners began to understand that this was not a temporary measure. Cleanliness was a rule, a discipline enforced just as firmly as curfews and roll calls. The Americans explained hygiene standards through interpreters, gesturing to show how to use soap properly, insisting that men scrub not only their arms and faces, but their feet, their hair, and the hidden folds of the body. Lice checks followed, carried out by medics who inspected clothing seams and bedding. Delousing powder was issued, along with clean undergarments. For the first time, many Japanese soldiers realized that the enemy treated disease prevention as seriously as they treated food or weapons. To the Americans, hygiene was not a luxury, but a necessity for order, health, and discipline within the camp. For the prisoners, this routine carried a strange mixture of humiliation and fascination. On one hand, they were stripped of individuality, compelled to wash on command like schoolboys. On the other, they discovered that life free from constant itching, sores, and infected wounds was surprisingly tolerable. A corporal who had fought on Guadalcanal remembered weeks when his unit bathed only once, in muddy streams, while tropical ulcers spread among his comrades. In contrast, after just a few weeks of enforced showers, the sores on his legs began to heal, and the chronic cough that plagued him faded. It was a quiet, undeniable improvement, an irony that gnawed at his pride. Language barriers caused endless confusion in the beginning. Many prisoners did not understand when guards shouted about washing hair or scrubbing feet, so they did the bare minimum. When they tried to skip steps, they were forced back under the streams, watched impatiently until the soap lathered properly. Some resented the interference, muttering that it was degrading. Yet, even in their resistance, they could not deny the results. Their uniforms, laundered regularly by camp procedures, no longer carried the foul stench of rotting cloth. Blankets smelled faintly of detergent instead of sweat and mildew. The barracks, once suffocating with the odor of unwashed bodies, grew more tolerable, even for those who never admitted it aloud. Gradually, the sense of suspicion gave way to habit. Prisoners began to anticipate the routine, lining up with less resistance. They learned to scrub more thoroughly, to dry themselves with care, to fold the towels as instructed. Some even compared soap types, noting which ones lathered better or smelled less harsh. It was a small detail, but for men stripped of freedom, such comparisons became a form of conversation, a way to fill long hours of idleness. Hygiene had transformed from a command into a shared ritual, something that quietly bound them together. What struck many most deeply was the realization that their captors expected them to maintain dignity, even in captivity. To be forced into showers and provided with soap was not only about controlling disease, it was about enforcing a certain standard of humanity. In the Japanese Army, soldiers had been taught that comfort was weakness, that endurance of filth and pain was a mark of honor. Now, under the discipline of their enemy, they were shown that regular washing could be as much a part of discipline as carrying a rifle. This clash of values unsettled them, but it also sowed the first seeds of reluctant respect for the strange, relentless order of their captors. The first time hot water cascaded over their shoulders, many Japanese prisoners gasped, some even stepping back as though scalded. Warmth, steady and controlled, poured from the overhead nozzles in a way they had never experienced before. For men accustomed to makeshift washing in cold rivers or hastily filled buckets, the sensation was almost luxurious. The steam rose quickly, curling through the air and softening the harsh light of the barrack-style room. The soap, pungent and foreign, foamed thickly on their skin, lifting away months of grime. They rubbed it tentatively at first, then with more vigor, marveling at the way the lather clung and rinsed away with ease. For some, the moment was overwhelming. They remembered how, during long campaigns in the jungles, officers had warned them to conserve every drop of water, that cleanliness was secondary to survival. On remote islands, baths were rare, Soldiers wiped themselves with rags, their skin perpetually sticky with sweat, salt, and dust. The few occasions when hot water could be heated in cans or drums were considered rare blessings, shared among dozens of men. Here, however, each prisoner stood under his own stream of warmth, as though such luxury were endless. It was not simply bathing, it was immersion in another world. The towels provided afterward deepened the shock. Thick and absorbent, they were unlike the thin cloth soldiers had once used in Japanese barracks, where men often had to share rags. Prisoners pressed the towels to their faces, inhaling the faint chemical scent of detergent. Their skin felt renewed, pores open, the sticky film of the tropics finally washed away. It was more than physical relief. It stirred emotions they had long suppressed. Some recalled family baths back home, memories of mothers drawing hot water in tubs before the war consumed their lives. Others thought of public bathhouses, now distant echoes of a civilian past. The camp showers reawakened those sensations, but now framed by the strangeness of captivity. The Americans treated the routine without sentiment, issuing soap and towels with the same blunt efficiency as rations. For them, it was procedure, disease prevention, morale management, order. Yet to the prisoners, it became a quiet revelation. The irony was bitter. They had expected cruelty, yet here they encountered comfort beyond what they had known even among their own forces. Some felt shame, believing such indulgence weakened them. Others embraced it silently, grateful for a moment that allowed their aching bodies to feel human again. Over time, the showers reshaped their daily existence. Instead of scratching at lice or ignoring festering sores, they learned that hot water soothed pain and sped healing. Their hair, once greasy and matted, grew soft and easier to comb. The smell of sweat that had clung to their uniforms diminished, replaced by the faint sharpness of disinfectant soap. Even the barracks air became lighter, less suffocating, as regular bathing reduced the odors of so many bodies living in confinement. Prisoners began to notice these changes with astonishment, quietly acknowledging that they were healthier than they had been during combat. The paradox gnawed at their minds. How could the enemy, whom they had been taught to despise, provide them with care that their own army had denied? The showers were not just about cleanliness. They were proof of a system so organized, so abundant in resources, that it could extend comfort even to captives. Standing under the streams of hot water, they could not help but feel both envy and unease. It was a reminder of how different this world was from the one they had left behind, and how far Japan lagged behind in offering such basic dignity to its own soldiers. At night, when the barracks dimmed and the long rows of prisoners lay on their cots, the conversations often drifted back to comparisons with their former lives in the Imperial Army. The subject was not weapons, not battles, but the strange discovery of hygiene. Men who had marched across Burma, who had fought in the jungles of the Philippines, now whispered about soap, towels, and the shock of hot water. It was not the sort of topic soldiers had ever considered honorable, but the contrast was too striking to ignore. In the Japanese military, bathing had been a rare event, carried out when circumstances allowed. Officers spoke of endurance, of ignoring the body's discomfort, of embracing filth as a sign of toughness. Soldiers often went weeks without washing, their skin layered with grime, their uniforms stiff with salt from dried sweat. Lice and fleas infested clothing seams. Tropical ulcers spread, untreated. The stench of unwashed bodies clung to every march, every camp, every night in the field. To complain about it was seen as weakness, unworthy of a true warrior. Yet, in these American camps, cleanliness was enforced, as though it were a law equal to discipline itself. One prisoner, a former sergeant, recalled aloud how his unit on New Guinea had shared a single rusty basin of water for 30 men. They had rinsed their faces and hands, but there had been no question of real bathing. He compared it bitterly to the endless streams of hot water in captivity.